Okay, so here's the envelope. I'm a little bit scared, especially since this is supposed to take 15 minutes. But here we go. Cover sheet. Interpreting at the Mental Healthy Clinic. Segment 1. You're a freelance interpreter that has just accepted an ongoing assignment interpreting for a newly established outpatient mental health clinic. The type of situation include one-to-one counseling sessions, small group sessions of no more than a dozen participants, and occasional large group sessions with an invited speaker. All of these sessions will be conducted by a therapist who cannot sign. You've been told that typically you will have a colleague working with you for the small and large group sections, but the one-to-one sessions you usually work alone. You arrive early for this first session, a one-to-one session. The therapist happens to meet you in the hallway and you begin talking. The therapist tells you that the deaf patient has called and left a message and that he will be about 30 minutes late. The therapist asks how you became interested in sign language and deaf people, and you tell your story. Then the therapist asks you about the residential experiences of deaf people and about an article that he read which claimed that there's a high level of sexual abuse of students in residential schools. For deaf students, what would you do? Why? See, I currently, and I don't know if I ever would have the knowledge to answer his question correctly. So in that case, I don't think I'd answer just because it seems inappropriate. Yeah, it seems very inappropriate for me to even answer the question. And I would tell that straight to the therapist because I am not there to answer questions, and also I am not deaf. So I've never been to residential school. So I would not, for one, be able to provide the correct information. And for two, I don't think it would be my place to even give the information. It's not my culture or my life that I would be talking about. So I wouldn't have the knowledge to give the correct information to the therapist. I also just don't feel like that should be discussed, especially if it's my first time on the job. Okay. And on to the next page. Segment number 2. After you respond, the therapist tells you that the reason he asks is that the deaf patient in this session has a history of child sexual abuse, and that this is the first in a series of court-ordered therapy sessions. The deaf person finally arrives and is someone you recognize from the interpreting you have done in the community. The therapist directs the deaf person to his office and the session begins. At the end of the hour, you accompany the deaf person to the receptionist's desk to schedule the next appointment. In the middle of trying to find a workable time, the therapist approaches you in front of the deaf person and asks if he can speak to you in private for a few minutes. I would tell the therapist no. I personally would say anything that you have to say to me, you can say in front of my deaf client, because I myself do not have a relationship with the therapist. I have a working relationship, I guess you could say, with the therapist and with the deaf client, but my client specifically is more geared towards the deaf client. And as part of the confidentiality agreement, I don't think I could talk to the therapist privately, especially if he's asking me about things the deaf client is about his life or whatever, because that would go against code of conduct. It's against confidentiality codes. So I would probably ask the therapist or tell the therapist that whatever he has to say, he can say it in front of my deaf client because that is actually his client. I'm just there to help facilitate communication. I am not there to provide information about the deaf client or to discuss the deaf client's life once he's left the room of the therapist. I think that the therapist asking me to speak in private is actually inappropriate, and I would tell him to say whatever he needs to say in front of the deaf client also. Segment number 3. A few weeks later, the deaf person is scheduled to join an ongoing group therapy session you've been asked to interpret. You've been told the group consists of the therapist plus approximately 12 men who are undergoing court-ordered treatments for sexual abuse of children. The group has been in session for a few months, and it is common for new people to join the group as others leave it. You have arranged for a colleague to interpret with you since you suspect this will be more demanding than the one-to-one counseling sessions. About 30 minutes before the session is to begin, you receive a page from your colleague saying that she has been involved in a car accident. We don't have... Sorry, just seeing page. We don't have pagers anymore, so we know this is an old article. Sorry. Has been involved in a car accident. She has suffered only minor injuries but has been taken to the hospital for x-rays as a precautionary measure. Thus, she will be unable to interpret the group counseling session. She has placed a call to a referral agency, but they have not been able to locate a replacement. You too contact the agency and confirm they have no one available on such short notice. What would you do and why? Part of me wants to assume that I'm going to take this job. And in the case that I'd take the job, I would do it for the deaf client because he needs to get his group therapy and he needs this in order to help him. Plus, it is court ordered, so he kind of has to go. But if I did have the opportunity to say no, I would probably ask if we could reschedule just because it would be too demanding upon one interpreter. Considering it's going to be multiple people in one room that I have to interpret for this one deaf person, but just by myself, it would be a lot to handle. Let alone, I just don't know if it would be possible. I feel like a lot of things would be missed and it would hinder the deaf client's experience rather than help it. I wouldn't really be helping facilitate communication. I'd just be kind of throwing in random spurts of information here and there, I feel like. So if possible, I'd ask to reschedule. Segment number 4. You decide that you really have no other viable option than to explain the situation to the therapist and let him determine whether or not to proceed under the circumstances. He tells you that this is a critical juncture in the deaf person's therapeutic program and insists that the session go on as scheduled. During the session, you struggle a few times to articulate some of the graphic fantasies described by a couple members of the group. Nevertheless, you leave the session feeling that under the circumstances, the deaf person was not disadvantaged, and apart from your own uneasiness at working the session alone, you feel that the session was generally quite successful. However, you begin to realize that this ongoing assignment is beginning to affect you emotionally. You're definitely not looking forward to the group section that way, especially after the graphic descriptions you interpreted this week. What would you do? Why? I think personally that I would continue to try out the assignment for a few more sessions or a few more weeks and see if it was really that bad. And if it does start to have an even worse effect on my life, emotionally or mentally, this environment, I would probably ask to not be part of it anymore, or at least the group sessions, because I understand I accepted this job and this is part of it, but if it's too much and it's causing me to be unhappy, then there's no point in me continuing on with this job if I'm just going to be miserable while I'm there. If that makes sense. So I would probably ask to not work with them or the group therapy sessions after a few more tries if it was still making me uncomfortable and was affecting me emotionally too much. Segment number 5. A few days later, a friend of yours asks you to interpret for a Cub Scout den meeting. Your friend's deaf son and another deaf boy belong to the Cub Scout den based at the local school they attend. However, they want to attend the upcoming regional scouting camporee Scouting Olympics that will take place over an upcoming long holiday weekend. You've been asked to interpret the organizational meeting because it is for your friend, and you agreed to do so on a pro bono basis. When you arrive, there are approximately 50 Cub Scouts and their parents, mostly fathers, at the meeting. You are waiting for your friend and his son to arrive. You notice one of the men there looks familiar. After a short time, you realize that he is one of the men from the group counseling session. You remember him quite clearly because of his graphic descriptions of his sexual fantasies that almost all of which involved young boys. What do you do? Why? Ah! Oh my God, Angie, this is terrible. Whew. Okay. I know technically it's confidential, but this is literally putting people's lives in danger in a way. Like, this man is having sexual fantasies involving young boys, and he is going on a camping trip full of 50 young boys. He could totally have plentiful opportunities to commit crimes that he does not want to commit. So I think I would actually tell a group leader, maybe? I know we're not supposed to break the confidentiality agreement, of course, but this wouldn't be breaking the deaf client's confidentiality agreement. It would be breaking someone else's. And I understand I'm theoretically not supposed to do that, but considering this could potentially harm these children that he's going on this camping trip with, I think I would say something, because something would have to be done. I would not be able to let him be on that trip knowing the sexual fantasies he has had about young boys. And I would have to break confidentiality for that. But in this case, it's a matter of safety. And I think safety is a little more important than confidentiality. Number 6. Finally, your friend and his son arrive, and after a few minutes, the meeting starts. The leader, after reviewing the tentative schedule, then asks for volunteers for various tasks, including driving, overnight supervisions, and competition judging. As fathers begin to volunteer for various tasks, the man you recognize from the counseling session volunteers to drive and be one of the two overnight supervisors. The leader thanks him and then announces that no more volunteers are needed. What would you do? I already at this point had decided I would say something. That is where it was. The thing is I'd probably end up telling my friend, I'd probably end up telling my friend and ask him if he could tell the group leader, or worst comes to worst, I could tell the group leader myself. But considering he volunteered to be an overnight supervisor and a driver, he is going to be with these kids for the majority of this trip, and it would not be safe for them to be there with him. And I'd break confidentiality. There's no question asked. I could not let a man who has sexual fantasies about young boys be going on a trip with young boys and being their supervisor and the one to drive them. That could cause so much trouble, and it wouldn't be right. It honestly wouldn't be right. I could not let that happen. I could not let these boys potentially be put in harm's way, all because of the person that is being their supervisor and is supposed to be watching them and protecting them. Instead, there's a possibility he could harm them, and in that case, I would have to say something. I could not say anything. Well, that's done. Thanks, Angie. See you soon.